Welcome to Metro Talk. I'm Kent Scheffel. Thanks for being with us. Jim Schrader, the publisher of the Telegraph, is alongside. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Kent.
And Pat Gowan, one of the editors with the Post-Dispatch, is here as well. Welcome, Pat.
Yeah, Kent, how are you?
All right. Pat, Senator Bill Hayne is co-sponsoring legislation that would reduce the pay for lawmakers by 5%. Do we need to see their pay cut?
Well, it'd be the fourth consecutive year. It's 12 furlough days. Legislator in Illinois base pay is almost $68,000 a year, not counting committee assignments and leadership perks that go with that. It'd save about $900,000 a year, which is a token amount against a state budget of $33 billion, but still, a significant amount of money. Since they've done this for years, it isn't a decision to do it; it's a decision to continue it. And given the economy we're in right now, it would seem like a bad time to stop. Politically, it's an election year. Oh my gosh, you stopped taking furloughs. I still get my furloughs, a lot of people would say. I think it would be a mistake politically for them to stop it now. And after all, it's supposed to be part-time work anyway. So it seems to me like a prudent, expected thing to do.
Jim, a 5% pay cut for lawmakers, should they do it?
Well, I would say join the ranks. There's still a lot of people that are going through pay cuts. There's still a lot of people that are going through furloughs. Unfortunately, state average unemployment is still higher than the national average. So it is a token type demonstration. It does allow these part-time legislators to say to their constituents, well, I share your pain and we can't balance the budget, so at least we're going to give our pound of flesh as well. As Pat points out, $67,000 for a part-time job is not bad. The per capita income or for workers in the state of Illinois certainly is nowhere near $67,000. But if it allows them to make their constituents feel good and they can glad hand each other on the backs and say, look what we've done, I think that's a wonderful thing. Some legislators in Springfield are not what we would call wealthy people. Others do very well for themselves. Others have had very lucrative careers prior to getting elected. Others have done well by retiring from other departments in the state and they're already collecting pensions and so forth. Others of them do have careers outside of the state house. So I still, I guess, go back to Pat's discussion we've had here so many times about the legislators in New Hampshire who work for $1 a term. You want
100, I think. 200 per term, $100 a year.
$100 a year. Okay.
And that's no expenses. No, beyond it. That's the whole thing.
So, I mean, if you really want to say we need to balance the budget, let them step forward and say we'll work for free until we get the budget balanced.
Pat, Rush Limbaugh has been selected to be a part of the Hall of Famous Missourians. And meanwhile, Post-Dispatch columnist Kevin Horrigan says, why not Jesse James?
Well, why not Kevin Horrigan? They ought to put him in there too. This is a function of the Speaker of the Missouri House who decides who will be honored in this way. I wouldn't be surprised if Jesse James showed up Sunday. It's got an interesting gallery of people from Thomas Hart Benton and to Walter Cronkite and Walt Disney, people that maybe you wouldn't even associate with Missouri, and you probably wouldn't associate with Rush Limbaugh either. But it's up to the Speaker. I think it says a lot more about the Speaker than it says about the capital, the state of Missouri, or Rush Limbaugh, if that's who he wants to have in there. And he's resolute behind that, and it's his prerogative, and it's private money. It's not the taxpayers paying for it. So I guess that's what's going to happen. Trying to decide what bothered me so much about this episode with Rush. We've gotten used to Rush. He's out there, he talks. Basically, the thing that bothers me about Rush, I guess, in general, is that he sort of emphasizes in my mind the number of Americans out there who are looking for somebody to just give them the answers. So no matter how outrageous what you say might be, if you say with enough conviction, folks, I know the truth, I know the answer, I am certain of it, and this is the way things are, and they believe that. And it bothers me if they believe it from a conservative, it bothers me if they believe it from a liberal, it doesn't matter who they believe it from, nobody's got all the answers. You know, if you're a person of faith, maybe God has all the answers, but short of that, nobody else does. And I think he's almost setting himself up as a God with this arrogant attitude of certainty about everything he says. And that it bothers me not because of him, but because of the audience that reaps and the number of people who are willing to be led around by the nose in a democracy where they're supposed to be leading the government instead of following somebody who is in effect an entertainer. He's a comic. He's not. He can't possibly take himself seriously all the time. No one in his right mind could take him seriously all the time, I don't believe. Now, having said that, this episode with the young woman and the controversy and having called her names and so forth, what's particularly bothersome about that is that she's a civilian. If he's in a political war and he snipes day in and day out at people who thrust themselves in the public spotlight as officials or public figures or leaders of public opinion, they're combatants, and if one of them happens to get zinged along the way, they can zing back, and that's just the way it is. They're all combatants in that war. She's not. She was an ordinary citizen who stepped up to participate in what is supposed to be an inclusive process. Nobody elected her to anything. As far as I can tell, she's not trying to be a leader of politicians or politics or public policy. She's a young woman who stood up and spoke her piece, and he opened fire on her. In not a very different fashion than an unfortunate thing that just happened in Afghanistan, where an American soldier opened fire on a bunch of civilians. She's a civilian, and that's what makes it wrong, and I think that's what's irritated advertisers. I think what's irritated a lot of Americans, and probably will force him to at least back up and keep his sights set on other soldiers in the war.
Jim, should Rush Limbaugh be in the Hall of Famous Missourians? Kevin Horgan says, why not put in Jesse James if we're putting in Rush Limbaugh?
Well, I think timing is everything here. If we'd have been having this discussion a year or so ago, it would have just been Rush is Rush. Chubby little kid that, grew up in Cape Girardeau County, did well for himself, and he's now has a national broadcast audience. And whether or not you agree with him or disagree with him, he has a huge audience. And yes, he's a famous Missourian. We wouldn't be having the discussion had it not been for a lady being called a name by Rush Limbaugh, which was done to antagonate, was done to stir people up. That's why he does it. Did he overstep his bounds? Yeah. Is it the first time? No. Is this the first time that he's had advertiser boycotts and people pull back from his show? No. Will it be the last? Of course not. What's interesting about Rush Limbaugh is for those, I think the count was up to 11 advertisers that pulled out, he'll fill those slots right back up. I saw it interesting. There was an online poll conducted by the St. Louis Business Journal. Should Cam Wex, the radio station that carries Rush Limbaugh in the St. Louis market, cancel his show? And 67% of the respondents said no, there's a place for his commentary. My place for Rush's commentary is the switch that changes stations or turns off the radio. But he has a right to say what he says. I believe that probably half of his audience listens to him just to get fired up, saying, what did this moron say today? But either way, he has a huge audience. He must show some success for his advertisers or they wouldn't stick with him year after year, which they do. And while he may be a comedian and he may not take himself very seriously, he takes himself very seriously to the bank and cashes some huge paychecks. Is he a famous Missourian? Certainly infamous. I don't know that he polarizes people any worse than the James gang did. If you remember, after the Civil War in the state of Missouri, they were alternately trashed as criminals or praised as people trying to take back what was taken from them during the Civil War. They started with Quantrill's Raiders, and they were basically taking things back. People helped try to hide them out. There were people writing newspapers, or writing letters to the editor, including to the Post-Dispatch, if I remember correctly, wanting them pardoned, wanting Frank James pardoned, because they did serve a purpose. So I don't know that they were any less polarizing than Rush Limbaugh. It was just a different time and a different place. I would say, if they want to raise money with private money to put Rush Limbaugh's head in the Hall of Famous Missourians, I don't see that being any worse than some drug addict having a star on the Hall of Fame in Hollywood when there weren't very nice people either.
Ditto.
You've been waiting for 10 minutes for that, haven't you? Time for a break. More after this.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Clark Minute. Today we're going to check out the music program with Dr. Teresa Crane.
Have you always wanted to learn how to play the piano? Maybe you wanted to learn Beethoven's Für Elise. Or maybe you like a more popular style like Jim Brickman. Or maybe you like jazzy blues. You can learn all this and more right here at Lewis and Clark Community College.
This has been your Lewis and Clark Minute.
When you open a book, you can explore new lands, make new friends, and discover new adventures. There are amazing possibilities when you open your mind to reading. Explore new worlds. Read.
60-inch screen, high definition. Football season is coming up. You can watch it right here. What do you think?
I'll take it.
Huh? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
You're right. I don't need it.
You're watching Metro Talk. I'm Kent Scheffel. Pat Gowan and Jim Schrader are here. Jim, money Illinois had set aside for the prosecution and defense in death penalty cases was going to be given to crime victims and their families after the state abolished the death penalty. That money still hasn't been given out, and the death penalty's been gone for quite a while now. Should there have been a better system in place to distribute that money?
That's just one more IOU that the state of Illinois has been mailing of late. We've had all kinds that, and while we're talking about this one specifically, this is what's troubling to me. Anytime the state government says we're going to earmark this for that, or this money is going to specifically go here, or it's going to go there, it doesn't end up there. It seems to me, on a regular basis, it doesn't end up there. In this particular case, I would be surprised if those families ever see that money. And it's not about the money to them, because nothing is going to make it right for the loss of a loved one. But the state has all kinds of promissory notes out there that they can't fulfill. We had a story on the front page Saturday about St. Anthony's Hospital, who hasn't received a payment from the state of Illinois of any substance since last June. I mean, you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and millions of dollars over the state of IOUs floating around out there that the state can't make good. And in this particular case, you've got one more do-gooder at the time saying, well, this will be great, we'll abolish the death penalty, and then we'll dole out all of this money to the victims' families. They don't have the money. It's not like it's sitting in a bank account somewhere, protected under lock and key. I don't think these people will ever see those funds, and just like every time the state of Illinois says we're going to impose this new fee and it's going to go to this organization or that organization, it rarely makes it through because they just pull something else out of the general fund and through smoke and mirrors imply it's coming from a different source. These people want to see the money.
Pat, did we have a problem that there wasn't a better system for distributing money to crime victims after the state abolished the death penalty?
Maybe. I'm less bothered by this than I would be if there were quid pro quo. It wasn't like the deal was, if we abolish the death penalty and you agree to that, then we'll give the money to crime victims. It really was not done, you do this, I'll do that. It wasn't done quite in that way. The death penalty was abolished a year ago, March of 2011, but that was the enabling legislation. The death penalty didn't actually go away, theoretically, until the end of June. You could still prosecute death penalty cases until then. They would end up probably being commuted, but the money had to stay available for to support death penalty prosecution and defense until that point. Legislature's out of session at that point. So the question then becomes, do you have the enabling bill introduced in the veto session where there was a lot going on? And I presume the decision was it was not a high enough priority for the veto session. So then the fresh session starts up in January, and this bill to distribute the money shows up in February. I'm not sure that distributing to crime victims, for some of the reasons Jim gave, is the right thing to do with it. If I were the loved one of someone who was murdered, for example, I think I would be more interested in seeing the money put into law enforcement and saving the next family from the grief that I felt. There are so many needs that the state has right now that I think there may be a better use for the money. I'm not quite sure what the exact use is even among crime victims, but whether that will be rethought, I don't know. Again, it's not really a lot of money spread across the landscape the way it is.
We'll have more Metro Talk right after this.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Clark Minute. Today we're going to check out the radio broadcasting program and WLCA with Mike Lemons.
Have you ever listened to your favorite radio station or your favorite disc jockey and say, I could do that? Or maybe you're the type of person who says, I could never do something like that. Well, with the help of first-year mass comm student John, we're going to show you just how easy it is. Each voice intro starts with talking about the band that just played, and we add a station identifier. Next, you want to offer some information that may be of interest to your audience. And finally, tell the listeners what the next song is, who sings it, followed by another station identifier. John will do one live now.
Silver Sun Pickup Substitution on WLCA. The Big Pink released their debut album called A Brief History of Love. The single is off that album. It's The Big Pink with Dominoes. It's on College Radio's Best 89.9.
This has been your Lewis and Clark Minute.
What's that? I don't know. Something I kind of made. Ooh, what's it do?
What do I do? Well, thanks for asking. I ring my bell and I like to dance. What do I do? Well, thanks for asking.
Ow! Yeah, it still needs a little work.
Anything's possible. Keep thinking. Get started on your own inventions or just play some games at inventnow.org.
Sounds like you could use some Van Gogurt. It's fortified with arts-rich nutrients to improve your math and reading skills. Catch!
Van Gogurt, thanks. So what's the deal with your ear?
Always with the ear, huh?
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
This is Metro Talk. I'm Kent Scheffel. Pat Gowan and Jim Schrader here. Pat, Senator Dave Luchtefeld has introduced legislation that would change the first and last school days for many school districts. Right now, many of the districts spend an hour or so at school on that first and last day. Under Senator Luchtefeld's legislation, it would turn into a full day. Is that a good idea?
Well, it may be a good idea, but I'm not sure it's one the state ought to mandate. There are two issues at work here. One is whether those days ought to be fully productively used. And if education is really a local prerogative and the local school board really runs the schools, and the local school board, in my view, ought to decide that, and not something else for the state to enforce its will about, especially a state that isn't paying its share of education to begin with. Pay us the money before you tell us what else to do. So I don't think it's a bad idea, and if I were on a local school board, I'd probably say, hey, can we more productively use these days, and why aren't we using the full breadth of the day for teaching kids. I think it's a reasonable question. I just think this is probably the wrong direction from which it's coming.
Jim, should we have full first and last days of school, or stick with the hour or two if that's what the district does?
Well, I can see the advantages of it, especially in most households today, most households with young kids, where both parents work. So you put this kid in class for a couple of hours after the whole school year being in there all day. Now a parent has to figure out how to get them picked up, how to get them to daycare, how to get the babysitter there to pick them up, rather than dropping them off at the babysitter's first thing in the morning that day, and as they will later in the summer. So I can see the value of that. As Pat points out, however, I got a problem with the state mandating it, because the state isn't doing what it is supposed to do with any of these school districts. Our front page today is outlining the cuts that are about to be experienced in the Edwardsville School District. We have similar type cuts that are going on in all of the school districts in the metro area. And many of those in St. Louis are running through the same problems, but especially in Illinois, because we're promised state funding is not forthcoming. I think they owe Edwardsville more than $3 million. Well, you don't pay bills to personnel, and you don't buy supplies, and you don't pay the light bill with the IOU from the state. So cuts are having to be made. If the local district says, you know what, this will make it easier for the parents if we just go ahead and have a full day, that way they can go on about their business, then that may make sense to do, but not because the state said so.
Pat, there's also legislation being considered in Springfield that would require online dating services to post whether or not background checks had been done on the people that are subscribers to the service. Should I, as a user, have to know whether or not the people that I'm talking to online have gone through a background check?
Well, generally, these sorts of things are buyers beware, but I think there's an important issue here that's being served by this proposal. It does not require the dating service to do background checks, but it requires them to disclose whether they do. And another step, if they do, it sets some standards for what it is they're checking. And there are critics who will say that they simply, not being law enforcement, that they simply will not have access to enough information to be much reassurance. And that very well may be true. It's very hard to nail down criminal backgrounds, especially if you don't have access to privileged information generally reserved only for law enforcement. But at least you know, if the service you're using says they do background checks, it will provide a state standard to which they must adhere, so you as a consumer will have some idea of the scope of the testing that's being done. Because otherwise, I guess I can run a dating site and say I'm checking the criminal background of Jim Schrader, and I Google Jim Schrader and read the top 10 entries, and I don't see a felony in there, so that's the background check, and you have no way of knowing the quality of the check. So I think more than anything, that's what this bill is about. These have become very prominent in the dating scene, very prominent in relationships, so I think some consumer protection is probably a good idea there.
The idea that they have to disclose, I think, is a good idea. Trying to mandate that they perform them, which is not in this bill, would be a different thing. Because then, you know, as we all know, or as employers know, background checks are not inexpensive if you really want something of any depth. They do cost money. If you need access to law enforcement records and things like that, those don't come free with a few key taps. There are things that are public knowledge that you can find out. If Pat Gowan has been incarcerated lately, or was convicted of a felony.
Not lately.
Not lately. That's right. I'm glad when you Googled me, you didn't check for misdemeanors, by the way. If I subscribe to a site in part because they say we do background checks of our members, then I want to know what kind of background check. Did they just Google their name and read the top 10 entries and say, okay, this lady must be okay? Or do we, go to the next page of Google and find out her alias is Lizzie Borden and she might have a record, Yeah, we can find out different things. It's the disclosure there, and it's also a disclosure of online information. I also would want to know that before I decide to subscribe myself. I might not want, as an end user to a dating site, I might not want someone prying into my background. So I think, like any other consumer service or any other online service that is required to run those legal notices at the beginning, that 16 pages of iTunes that you never read, it's probably, if they are going to do background checks, I think the consumer has a right to know, but they also have a right to know how deep they're going to dig.
And this is not a replacement for good sense. I'm thinking Ted Bundy, who was a serial killer and turned out to be a very unpleasant person to date. But as far as I know, until he was finally caught for the whole kit and caboodle, he had no criminal record. It doesn't necessarily mean if they're checking that they're going to keep the creeps out.
Well, and if you look at pictures of Jeffrey Dahmer, I would think that he would have been popular on a dating site. Young, energetic, good-looking guy. You would think that there would have been some interest in him. But as Pat said, if they'd done a background check on him, he didn't have any conviction.
Would a background check do any good if I forget about the criminal records and just the fact that I put out false information about whether or not I have a family, whether or not I have kids, whether or not I have a job?
How are you going to check that? There's a story in the news this week where Facebook recommended that this individual like this other person because they had similar interests and they had other friends, in common. Well, it turns out that the recommendation was to the current wife of this lady who was never divorced from the man. So they are still legally married. Facebook recommends that she like this person, who interestingly has her last name, and her Facebook picture was of the wedding of she and the first lady's current husband that had never divorced her. Okay.
Well, they said they had a lot in common.
They had a lot in common, yeah, they got the same husband. Would that turn up in a background check? I don't know. Is a background check going to require somebody like Match.com to interview my two ex-wives? And how much stock do you put in what they say? Are they going to be protected from slanderous statements? If they say, he was a lying, cheating thief? Or is it just going to be, were you married to him and are you divorced now? And yeah. Are they going to search divorce records? I mean, you really get into a slippery slope here.
That's going to do it for this round of Metro Talk. Thanks for being with us. Pat Gowan, one of the editors with the Post-Dispatch, has been here, along with Jim Schrader, the publisher of the Telegraph. I'm Kent Shuffle. We'll see you next time.